Before Walmart, before Amazon. There was Main Street, where every handshake meant something, and the butcher knew your name. What happened to that world? On a summer evening in small-town America, the sidewalks were alive with families finishing dinner and heading out for a stroll. The air carried the smell of popcorn from the Five and Dime, the faint jingle of a bell above the hardware store's door, and the laughter of children chasing each other down the block with penny candy tucked into their pockets. Every shop had its rhythm, and together they created the heartbeat of a town. The barber leaned out of his chair between customers to wave at a passing friend. The grocer knew which family liked their bread sliced thin, which one still asked for milk in glass bottles, and who might need an extra bag of apples on the tab until payday. In a time before credit cards and online banking, trust was the currency. A scribbled note behind the counter was enough to carry a family until next week. These weren't just businesses. They were anchors. The butcher didn't just sell meat. He shared recipes, asked about your kids, and slipped in an extra cut for Sunday supper. The barber wasn't just cutting hair. He was passing on stories, swapping jokes, and keeping the pulse of the community. And the Five and Dime wasn't just where you bought buttons or candy. It was where teenagers dreamed, grandmothers lingered, and neighbors bumped into each other as though fate had planned it. Life moved at a different pace. No one rushed to the next errand. Instead, errands became the day's purpose. Walking downtown wasn't just about getting things done. It was about being seen, about belonging to a place where everyone knew your face. The town itself seemed stitched together by these simple routines, from the Saturday trips to the bakery to the Sunday morning greetings outside the church doors. Each moment felt small, but together they formed a fabric of belonging. The sidewalks weren't only for shopping. They were stages for memory. Parents held their children's hands a little tighter as they passed the busy street. Friends lingered under awnings, sharing gossip or news from the factory. A high school couple, nervous but smiling, sat at the counter of the drugstore sipping sodas from striped straws. For those who grew up in that time, the smallest details, the creak of a wooden floorboard in Jack Penny, the familiar squeak of a screen door at the diner still linger like ghosts in memory. In the 1970s, Main Street wasn't a relic of the past. It was alive, breathing, and ordinary in the best possible way. It offered something that can be found in a price tag or shipping speed, a sense of place, a feeling of connection, the quiet knowledge that you were part of something larger than yourself. But time doesn't stand still, and neither did America's way of shopping. ChatGPT said, it started with smaller, bigger stores, bigger parking lots. At first, it was exciting, but it would change everything. By the late 1960s and into the 1970s, towns across America began to see a quiet shift in the way people shopped. Supermarkets stretched wider, department stores grew taller, and suddenly the corner store was no longer the only option. The draw was simple: more choices under one roof, more space to park, and prices that seemed to stretch $1 further than ever before. Families piled into station wagons and drove toward the edges of town, where new buildings promised convenience and comfort. What once required a walk down Main Street, a stop at the butcher, then the bakery, then the grocer could now be done in one place. For busy households, it felt like progress. Mothers pushing carts down bright, spacious aisles filled with packaged goods and endless shelves of cereal boxes found a kind of novelty in this new abundance. Shopping was no longer a task spread across a dozen storefronts, but a single weekly trip. The parking lot became the new plaza of America. Rows of cars stretching toward the horizon, mothers unloading groceries, children swinging their legs off the tailgate as fathers pushed carts back to the corral. It was wide, bright, and efficient. Everything downtown had never been. For a time, the excitement of these changes overshadowed what they were replacing. Shiny storefronts felt modern compared to the creaky floorboards of old shops, and the sheer variety seemed to promise a better way of life. Behind the convenience, though, something subtle began to erode. As more families drove to the outskirts, fewer strolled down Main Street. The sidewalk chatter that once made towns feel alive grew quieter. The butcher's counter had fewer familiar faces each week. Neighbors who might once have bumped into each other outside the hardware store now passed each other anonymously in larger, sterile aisles. Community was no longer stitched into the act of shopping. It was being traded for speed, variety, and price. Early versions of shopping centers and enclosed malls began to appear, drawing even more traffic away from downtown. With them came a new way of thinking, shopping as an event, as entertainment, rather than a daily rhythm. The old model of short, personal visits was being replaced by long afternoons wandering wide hallways, surrounded by chain stores that felt the same no matter what town you visited. For many, this was thrilling. For others, it felt like the soul of their hometown was being slowly hollowed out. At first, no one imagined what these changes would mean in the long run. A Saturday trip to the supermarket or department store seemed harmless, even helpful. But with each visit, downtown life faded just a little more. The very heart of small-town America was quietly being pulled toward the edge of the map, one cartload at a time. But before the giants claimed the edge of town, they quietly set up shop on Main Street itself. Woolworths had grilled cheese. Jack Penny had creaky floors. Even the chains once felt like home. In the 1970s, national brands didn't always feel like outsiders. They were woven into the rhythm of small-town life, often blending so seamlessly into Main Street that they felt as personal as the corner bakery or the family-run barber shop. These stores carried names known across America, but in the context of a small town, they became something softer, more familiar. Woolworth's lunch counters were more than places to grab a quick sandwich. They were community gathering spots. Families stopped in for milkshakes after school events. Workers on lunch break ordered steaming bowls of soup, and teenagers nervously shared fries on their first dates. The clink of dishes, the smell of grilled cheese, and the chatter of neighbors turned a national chain into something intimate. A stop at Woolworths wasn't just shopping, it was social life. Jack Penny and Sears held their own special charm. Their wooden floors creaked underfoot, echoing decades of footsteps. In many towns, these department stores weren't imposing corporate monoliths. They were anchors of Main Street, designed to match the brick facades around them. The aisles were narrower, the signage more modest, and the clerks often lived just down the block. These were the places where you picked up your winter coat, your Easter dress, or the new pair of shoes that would carry you through the school year. And then there were the catalogs. Before the internet, the Sears and Jack Penny catalogs were miniature worlds in themselves, thick volumes filled with everything from furniture to toys. Families circled items in the margins. Children dreamed over bicycles and dollhouses. And when the order finally arrived, it was picked up at the local store. That simple act, walking downtown to collect a long-awaited package, blended national scale with local connection. These stores were staffed by neighbors. The friendly clerk behind the counter might be the same person you saw at church on Sunday or at the football game on Friday night. Shopping here still felt personal. You were greeted by name, asked about your family, and treated with a kind of attention that made even a chain feel local. Because of that, emotional ties ran deep. People remembered where they bought their first suit, or the counter where they ordered their first milkshake with friends. These weren't faceless corporations, yet they were chapters in the story of daily life. Big names didn't erase local culture. In those years, they adapted to it. For a while, it seemed like there was room for both worlds, the warmth of Main Street and the reliability of national brands. But the balance wouldn't last. As highways grew busier and cars became central to American life, the chains began to see a bigger future waiting just beyond the town square. But it wasn't long before these beloved names followed the money and the cars. The superstores didn't just sell more. they redefined what shopping meant in America. By the 1980s and 1990s, the landscape of American towns was changing faster than anyone had expected. Malls rose on the edges of highways, drawing shoppers away from Main Street with promises of endless choices under one roof. Families who once strolled along familiar sidewalks now spent their Saturdays wandering long, carpeted corridors lined with national chains. It wasn't just about buying, it was about being part of something bigger, shinier, more modern. The big box boom followed close behind. Stores grew larger than anyone had imagined, with vast parking lots stretching toward the horizon. Unlike the cozy brick storefronts of old downtowns, these new giants looked the same no matter where you lived. Flat facades, fluorescent lights, endless aisles stacked high with goods. The design wasn't meant to charm. It was meant to move people in and out quickly. Identity was stripped away in favor of efficiency. For many families, the shift felt practical. Why visit 3 or 4 small shops when everything you needed from groceries to clothing to hardware was available in one place? Convenience was the selling point, and in a culture where time increasingly felt scarce, it was hard to argue. Parents could load their kids into the car, stock up for the week, and head home all in a single trip. To many, this seemed like progress. But with every trip to the mall or superstore, something intangible was lost. The small exchanges that once defined the community, the butcher remembering your order, the barber asking about your children, slowly disappeared. The sound of bells above shop doors gave way to the hum of fluorescent bulbs. Familiar quirks of local businesses, the smell of fresh bread, or the creak of old floors, were replaced by a sterile sameness that spread from town to town like a blueprint. The cultural cost was harder to measure. People stopped forming memories in the same way. A haircut at the corner shop or a milkshake at Woolworths carried a sense of place, a tie to the town's identity. A shopping trip to a mall, no matter how convenient, felt less unique. The memories were more generic, harder to separate from one community to the next. Traditions rooted in place were being replaced by a culture of scale and speed. It was efficient, it was modern, but it wasn't personal. And when the novelty wore off, many towns began to realize what had quietly slipped away. Main Street wasn't just about shopping. It was about belonging. And with every new superstore, that belonging dimmed. And once the giants left, Main Street began to fade store by store, window by window. The barber closed. The bell on the door stopped ringing. And just like that, Main Street went quiet. What had once been the center of daily life was now a stretch of silence, interrupted only by the occasional passing car. One by one, the mom-and-pop stores that had defined small-town America shuttered their doors. The butcher who had once slipped an extra slice of bologna to a child at the counter retired without anyone to take his place. The corner drugstore, once alive with soda fountains and friendly chatter, stood empty, its windows gathering dust. The change was visible in every detail. Boarded-up storefronts and peeling paint became common sights where bright displays once greeted neighbors. Hand-painted signs faded in the sun until only ghosts of lettering remained. For sale and for lease, notices filled window after window, creating a patchwork of absence that told a story without words. Main streets that had once been alive with movement looked like sets left behind after the show was over. People kept driving, but now they drove past their own downtowns without stopping. The parking spaces that were once fought over on a Saturday afternoon stayed empty. Families who once made weekly trips downtown now spent their money at malls or superstores on the outskirts, bypassing the places that had once made their towns feel alive. The rhythm of daily life had shifted, and with it, the center of community had drifted away. For children, the loss was especially profound. The landmarks of their memories, the candy counter, the ice cream parlor, the shop that sold baseball gloves vanished without warning. A place that had once held their laughter and wonder now stood hollow. And when they returned years later, there was nothing left to recognize. The buildings remained, but the spirit inside them had gone quiet. The emotional toll was harder to name, but impossible to ignore. Main Street had more than a row of stores. It was the heartbeat of small towns, the stage where neighbors crossed paths and stories were shared. When that pulse stopped, towns didn't just lose businesses, they lost a part of their identity. A walk down a hollowed-out Main Street carried a sense of grief, as though the town itself was mourning. For those who remembered the way it once was, nostalgia grew heavier with each passing year. They could still hear the faint echoes of what used to be the ring of the cash register, the familiar laugh of a shopkeeper, the warmth of knowing that everyone you met downtown knew your name. But those sounds now lived only in memory, not in the world around them. The collapse of the community wasn't measured only in economics. It was felt in the silence, in the spaces between people, in the loneliness that replaced what was once a connection. But it wasn't just stores we lost. It was something deeper. We gained speed, but lost our stories. Was it really worth it? On the surface, progress brought undeniable benefits. Shopping became easier, faster, and more efficient. A single trip to a sprawling store or a drive to the mall could replace a dozen errands downtown. Shelves stretched endlessly with products from every corner of the country. And for the first time, many families felt like they had access to abundance. But convenience came with a quiet cost, one that couldn't be measured in price tags or receipts. The personal touch that once defined shopping began to vanish. There was no clerk who remembered your children's names, no grocer who set aside your favorite cut of meat. Transactions became quicker, but they also became colder. Shoppers pushed carts through endless aisles, checked out at registers where clerks rotated weekly, and left without a single conversation that tied them to the place. The efficiency was undeniable, but the connection was gone. This new rhythm of life fed something else: disconnection. As stores grew larger and schedules grew tighter, people spent less time talking and more time rushing. The small rituals that had once brought neighbors together, chatting outside the bakery, catching up in the barber's chair, bumping into a friend at the hardware store, faded into the background. In their place was silence, broken only by the beeping of scanners and the rustle of plastic bags. Traditions that had once given life a certain texture were quietly traded for speed. Families no longer walked together downtown on Saturday mornings, stopping for ice cream or browsing store windows. Children no longer grew up with the memory of a shopkeeper slipping them a piece of candy or a barber handing them a lollipop after a haircut. Instead, shopping became an errand to get through, not an experience to savor. Consumerism began reshaping human interaction in ways few noticed at the time. The focus shifted from relationships to transactions, from community to consumption. The value of more for less overshadowed the value of knowing who you were buying from. Stores became less about people and more about shelves, less about stories and more about sales. And while families might have saved a few dollars, what they truly lost was harder to name: a sense of place, of belonging, of being known. Looking back, the human cost feels heavier than the bargains we gained. The progress that promised abundance left behind emptiness in unexpected places. Shopping was no longer about weaving lives together. It was about efficiency, speed, and moving on to the next thing. The question lingered in the silence: was the trade worth it? And just when Main Street thought it couldn't get worse, something even bigger arrived. Then came Amazon, and the store in your town became a website. At first, it felt like a novelty, almost a magic trick. In the late 1990s, the idea that you could order something from your couch at midnight and have it show up at your door days later seemed like a glimpse of the future. No lines, no parking lots, no closing hours. Just a few clicks, a credit card, and patience. Convenience had reached an entirely new level, and once people tasted it, there was no going back. The digital avalanche didn't just change shopping. It rewrote the rules of commerce itself. Suddenly, geography no longer mattered. The store wasn't on Main Street, or even at the edge of town. The store was everywhere and nowhere, living inside a glowing screen. Why drive to the mall when the mall could come to you? Why wait until Saturday to run errands when you could browse from bed, pajamas on, coffee in hand? The progress was merciless to those who came before. Legacy giants like Sears and JCPenney stores that had once defined shopping in America crumbled under the weight of the digital tide. Once upon a time, their catalogs were the heart of small-town households, pages dog-eared and circled with Christmas wishes. Now, those thick books looked quaint, outdated, swallowed whole by the endless scroll of online listings. Local shops, already battered by big box chains, faced their final blow. Bookstores, record shops, even video rental stores, all the places where people once lingered, browsed, and discovered, were replaced by digital platforms. Music streamed instead of being held. Books arrived in cardboard boxes instead of being pulled from creaky wooden shelves. Movies flickered onto living room screens with no clerk to recommend a hidden gem. The physical rituals that gave shopping its human touch were disappearing one by one. The speed was breathtaking. Within a single decade, entire industries vanished. Towns that had once mourned the closing of a single hardware store now watched helplessly as malls themselves became ghost towns. What had once been centers of activity were left hollow, their food courts echoing with silence, their storefronts papered over with for lease signs. The promise of convenience didn't just overwhelm tradition, it erased it. And yet, this wasn't just about economics, it was cultural. Shopping had always been about more than products. It was about being part of something. Browsing aisles with a friend, running into neighbors, exchanging stories at the counter, all replaced by tracking numbers and confirmation emails. The experience of shopping became purely transactional, stripped of its social fabric. It was fast, efficient, and strangely empty. By the 2010s, America's relationship with shopping had transformed completely. Main Street was no longer just forgotten. It was irrelevant. What mattered now was speed, selection, and price. Everything else was background noise. But just as it all seemed lost, something surprising began to happen. A new generation is discovering the charm of old storefronts and breathing life into the past. What once sat empty, with boarded windows and peeling paint, is now glowing again with warm lights and hand-painted signs. In small towns across America, there's a quiet but powerful movement underway, a return to roots. People are realizing that not everything worth saving can be digitized. Some things need brick, wood, glass, and the sound of footsteps on a sidewalk. Historic districts, once written off as relics, are being restored with care. The old brick facades, iron benches, and neon signs that had faded into memory are finding new purpose. Farmers markets spring up where department stores once stood, bringing neighbors face to face again. On Saturdays, stalls overflow with fresh produce, homemade pies, and jars of honey, each purchase carrying not just a price, but a story. A handshake replaces the add to cart button, and the transaction feels alive. Younger generations, raised in a world of glowing screens and two-day shipping, are leading much of this revival. They crave something authentic, something that feels real. They want coffee from a cafe where the barista knows their name, not just their order. They want shelves of handmade pottery, vinyl records, and vintage clothing, each piece touched by human hands. What their parents once left behind, they are now eager to reclaim. Downtown streets, once silent, are alive with events again. Parades roll through during holidays, shop windows glow for festivals, and small-town theaters reopen with live music and plays. People linger on sidewalks, laughing, talking, catching up in ways that remind us that community is not a luxury, it's a necessity. For children, these aren't just events. They are memories being planted, the same way earlier generations remembered penny candy and soda fountains. Nostalgia has become its own form of fuel. Travelers seek out small towns, not for the newest attractions, but for the oldest. They want to walk where history still breathes. Shop local is no longer just a slogan, it's a lifeline. Every dollar spent downtown is an act of preservation, a choice to keep the past woven into the present. And slowly, storefront by storefront, Main Street begins to hum again. This return isn't about rejecting progress. People still order online, still swipe cards, still live in a fast-paced world. But there's a growing understanding that something was lost when we traded slowness for speed. The revival of Main Street is a reminder that life doesn't have to be only efficient. It can also be meaningful, textured, and shared. Because no matter how much changes, one truth still holds. Main Street isn't just a place. It's a feeling. And in some towns, it's coming back to life. For every boarded-up window and faded sign, there's a light flickering on again. For every memory of what was lost, there's a story being retold in a new voice. The truth is, Main Street never really disappeared. It lingered in memories, in traditions, in the quiet ache for something simpler, warmer, more human. Main Street was never just about shopping. It was about trust, belonging, and the rhythm of daily life. It was the nod of recognition from the barber, the butcher slipping in an extra slice of ham, the clerk who remembered your children's names. Those gestures weren't transactions. They were threads weaving people together. And though the buildings crumbled, those values never went away. They lived on, waiting for the world to need them again. Trends rise and fall. Chains come and go. Technology reshapes how we live, faster than we can keep up. Yet beneath all the change, the human heart longs for the same things it always has: connection, familiarity, community. That's why, even now, people are drawn back to old brick streets, to farmers' markets under the open sky, to cafes where time slows down. Progress may alter the setting, but it cannot erase the need. The story of Main Street is not just a story of decline. It's a story of resilience. Yes, there was loss, quiet towns silenced, neon signs dimmed, families driving past the center of their own communities. But there was also rebirth, born from the very nostalgia of those who remembered. People realized that the past wasn't just something to mourn. It was something to preserve and even rebuild. And so, in every restored storefront and every reopened diner, there's proof that Main Street is still America's enduring heart. Not because of what it sells, but because of what it represents. It reminds us that life isn't measured only in what we buy, but in the stories we share while buying it. It teaches us that belonging is worth more than convenience, and that memory is a kind of wealth that never devalues. Each generation rediscovers this truth in its own way. For children growing up now, the smell of fresh popcorn at a street fair or the sight of a Christmas parade downtown will linger as their version of Main Street. And years from today, they too will look back and realize that these moments were never small at all. Main Street never really left. It's been waiting quietly, patiently for us to remember that the strongest walls are not made of brick and mortar, but of trust, kindness, and community. The story is not finished because it lives every time neighbors gather, every time a light is switched on behind an old glass window, every time someone chooses connection over isolation. So, as you think back on your own Main Street, whether it's still bustling or just a memory held on to it, share it, because these stories and the values they carry are what keep America's heart beating. And now, we'd love to hear from you. What do you remember about your Main Street?